Welcome to the Coaching Family Soccer Coaching Podcast, a podcast for soccer coaches from grassroots to the pro game. Soccer coaches who love the game, love coaching, and want to get better. Join our community on Twitter at Coaching Family.
So guys, welcome to another episode of the Coaching Family Soccer Coaching Podcast. This week we're talking about scanning, obviously joined with my good friend Glenn Hicks, and today we have a very special guest, Kevin. Kevin, why don't you introduce yourself? Kevin McGreskin, you're one of the most experienced coaches and coach educators around, also just Kev, give us a real brief, just 20 seconds, just a bit of about some of your experiences coaching around the world.
I'm Kevin McGreskin. I've got my A licence. Been fortunate to coach both the women's and the men's side. I coached at Dundee United and Partick Thistle in Scotland, where incorporated a lot of the scanning ideas and training, and most recently been coaching at Club America Femenil in the Women's Professional League in Mexico, and done a lot of work with the Irish presenting on their UEFA Pro A licence and B licence courses over the years, particularly about this subject to scanning and game awareness.
Fantastic. And Glenn, how you doing, mate? Good to have you back on. How's things going?
Yeah, good, mate. Yeah, all going well. Had to deal with a few storms, but that weren't the biggest. In Manchester, there was a hurricane last night as well.
Yeah, okay. Let's get rid of that week. Take that week Tottenham banter out of here, mate. This is a non-Tottenham banter show. Anyway, look, so what I thought would be great, listen, we're talking about scanning, and if you don't know, Kevin's got a new book out, which is really interesting, really fantastic, and also scanning, and talks a little bit about, identifying it, talking about how to train it. So I thought it'd be an ideal opportunity to get him on the show to talk about his specialism here, because I thought it's a bit interesting, actually. We talked, just chatting before we came on air here, about scanning almost, used to be also, almost thought as almost, you know what I mean, for coaches, or very, almost a bit of the unknown. But now it's become a lot more involved. Our friend Jed Jorday, was it Jed Jorday, Kevin?
Yep.
Jed Jorday also now is very big on Twitter, does a lot of this really interesting stuff which I've seen, which sort of makes it quantifiable. Do you know what I mean? Almost like, that's tangible almost. You can say, like, that's actually, you can talk about that in terms of how you're coaching players. But Kevin, why don't you give us a little bit of your, how did you come about working in this particular area and scanning and become a specialist for you?
I think, quite a few years ago, I was one of these coaches that had many ideas about trying to help players, and I understood the importance of decision making, and I kind of had an idea of, looking about, but I wanted to promote that further. I realised players just weren't looking about as often as they should. They followed the ball too much, even as they were receiving a pass, and they didn't seem to have a picture in their head. So I started trying to come up with ideas on how to promote them, not solely focusing on the ball, and being able to learn to split their attention between the ball and looking at other areas of the playing field, and really just scanning away from the ball. So that's where I started. I started with, introducing silly ideas into drills, building them up from drills into unopposed practices and into opposed practices. And you mentioned Gears Your Debt, and I was very lucky. I met him in about 2010. The first time I met him, we met up in London for a coffee, and we had a chat, and it was great to actually meet somebody that shared this same passion, and we bounced ideas off each other. And his work's been fantastic, as an academic, as a researcher. He's, as you say, he's been able to put statistics to it, which has been great, because as anybody that's, as you've mentioned, we've not maybe really known how to train it, or it hasn't been quantifiable, or we haven't realised the impact it's had on the game. So his work's been fantastic. But that was how I got into it years ago, and just started with a silly drill that I put an extra couple of constraints in, and that was my, eureka moment in trying to develop scanning, but really basic.
What about you, Glenn? What's your thoughts on scanning in terms of how do you train that?
Yeah, I'm very similar. I just think, to be honest, Saul, maybe we don't coach from the shoulders up enough. So what I mean is, every time a misplaced pass has been misplaced, it's always the technical thing that we'll, in general, I know I'm generalising, but we'll pounce on. But as coaches, are we looking for the stuff that we need to look for as well? So if we take our eyes off the ball and play a Cam, the central midfielder that didn't quite play that pass, was we watching that player 5 seconds before he received it to see what his head was doing, rather than the outcomes through his feet? And I think we've got to coach the head and the shoulders up a lot more. I generally tend to do it quite a lot. I don't think I've done it in the first 5, 6, 7 years of my coaching, because again, I think there was an ignorance towards it and a lack of awareness. But I just think we've got to coach from the shoulders up a hell of a lot more. So.
Yeah, I mean, I remember my early time at Spurs when I transitioned from the under 9s to the 11s, where the 9s was much individual possession, so wasn't as much importance around it, into the 11s, which was much more group possession orientated, or the transition. And my interpretation was that was just playing with your head up almost, that sort of simplification, if that makes sense, and creating practices with, for example, overloads where there's always a spare pass. You always got to be looking, so you're encouraging players to get their head up and and be aware of what's going around. I suppose that's sort of the most simplistic form if you're talking about it. I mean, then my belief was still that that having that mastery of the ball then feeds into the ability to play, then have the ability to play with their head up, if that makes sense as well. But then I suppose then the question is then, to you then, Kev, then how do we train this, particularly, we're talking about the youngest age groups. How do we train, how does we put this into our training sessions?
Well, it's really, to me, it's really easily done. Now, what I always caveat the way I do things is I'm not saying it's the way, it's a way of training it, and other coaches will find ways that maybe work for them and the group of players that they work with. But it's like anything in football. Well, it's not rocket science, and you can put in really simple constraints that promote more scanning than our exercises currently do. And I agree with you about, a player needs to have a good repertoire of technique or skills, whatever you want to call them. We know what we're on about here. And that might give them a certain comfort to look. But if they've never learned the habit of looking away from the ball, then you need to then train that as an ability as well. And I'm not trying to separate the two too much, but I feel like at the younger ages we allow them to focus on the ball and solely on the ball far too much. And as coaches, when we go into sessions, the only coaching point about scanning seems to be they'll go in and say, remember to check your shoulder, or words to that effect. Well, if that was good enough, do you think that coaches have maybe been saying that for decades to players? Yet when Gear does his research on players in the English Premier League, he sees a marked difference in players at the top level of the game. So as coaches, we're missing a trick somewhere. That's what I feel. So therefore, if we want our players to have better abilities at this, I think we've got to be more proactive in how we coach it. Now, then the methods that we use to coach it, whether implicitly or explicitly, we could debate that. But I feel it's something that has to be, as coaches, we really need to be proactive about how we coach it.
Yeah, I mean, I saw it in your book, which is available in all good store. Where is it available, Kev? Amazon, or where can people buy your book? Scanning.
I think you can get it on Amazon and everything, but I did it through Soccer Tutor. Who I've worked with for years. They've sold my DVDs for years. I've released DVDs in 2010 with the Irish FA, but soccertutor.com.
So Soccer Tutor or Amazon. Anyway, I've been reading the book. Fantastic book. When I was reading it, you talk about. Well, Jed talked about Xavi being top of the show, then Lampard and Gerrard just underneath that one, and you got your Messis and your Iniestas, the hierarchy of almost the scanners. Mm-hmm. My question would be like, someone like Lampard and Gerrard, they just, and Xavi, they've just naturally evolved into these sorts of, high level outliers in terms of their scanning ability. And how do we train? Then can we replicate that? They just outliers? How do we? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I often have this debate about, some people think it's this thing that the magic fairy came along with some magic dust when you're born that goes, right, you've got some scanning, you've got some awareness, but you're not getting any. They missed me with that fairy dust. But no, If you hear about some of the anecdotal stuff, actually, Lampard, his dad used to keep shouting at him, pictures, and telling him all the time during training and games as he was developing as a young player, promoting this habit of looking about. So you can argue that actually he was coached. I mean, this is a guy that was... I've got a funny story about it, actually, because he scans a superb player, absolutely brilliant player, and one of the top players that the Premier League's ever seen. And I was chatting with quite a senior coach one time, and because we were on about scanning, he said, actually, you know what? I think maybe Lampard looks around too much.
Wow.
And I'm like thinking, I'm just in my head, I'm having this conversation. I just said to him, all right, okay. And in my head, I'm thinking, oh, well, maybe we should have went to Lampard and said, you could have had a much better career. Think of the career that you could have had if you'd have looked around just a little bit less. And Xavi, he was probably put into exercises where he had to develop to a certain degree, but bearing in mind, he was very small in stature, he wasn't the quickest, so was this coping strategy that he developed as a player to survive in amongst his peers and excel within his peers. And so on that point, even if these are outliers, as coaches, they would just say, all right, okay, you're either going to develop it really well or you're not. Or as coaches, they would go back to this, we need to proactively coach this. This is too important a piece of the puzzle, because it's just one piece of the puzzle. This is too important piece of the puzzle just to leave to chance. What can we do to those players? We've got Xavi and Lampard and Gerrard in our training group just now. How do we help these other players get closer to them? We might never get them to their levels, but how do we move them get closer to them? How do we help them add this piece of the puzzle to their game, to the attributes that they've got? And so
then go on in. So then go on, Kev, because I know we're pressed for time here, so I'm going to, excuse me, I don't jump in because I want to get all the juicy bits, before we can. How does that look then? You're training your under 8s, and you've got your under 8s on the Wednesday night. How do you coach scanning with your under 8s?
Well, it starts with simple stuff, where whether you want to put it in a drill, whether you want to put it in a post exercise. Me, I use a lot of, whether it's I put on coloured gloves, coloured wristbands, use coloured cones, coloured pennies, because all you're trying to do is promote a habit, is to get them to learn to understand the moments when, to try and look away from the ball, not to solely focus their attention on the ball. Now, when I go out, I still show drills everywhere I go. Why? Because wherever you go in the world, people will still use drills. So I'm not the kind of coach that goes out and tells people, don't use drills. I'm more of, okay, if you're going to use drills, how can we add some constraints into this exercise, into the format that you're using, that you're comfortable with, that'll help the players develop further, that'll help promote this aspect of scanning. Now, a drill is obviously limited in what it can do. But you can get people holding up gloves, one hand, two hand, just to promote that look away from the ball. And then you can be very specific of when you want them to look away from the ball. And then opposed practice. Unopposed practices when you've got a dynamic environment inside the playing area. I'll just put what I call flashers on the outside of the area. You have a couple of people going around again, holding up one hand, two hands, red glove, yellow glove, whatever it might be. And all you're trying to do is ask can you shift your attention between the balls and the players on the outside? And I get very specific about the demands and constraints that I've put in there. And similar with opposed practices. Now, the thing is, with this, people get hung up on the colours. And I'm going, well, it's not the colours that are important. I'm asking the players to scan and search for other players. That's what's important. Can you scan and search for other players? Can that then impact on your body position and your location in the field of play? And these things start coming together, actually, because as you promote one habit, they develop other habits. Like, for example, in a simple... you imagine an opposed practice where we're in a square, we've got a support player on each side and it's 2v1 in the middle for the attacking team. So effectively you've got a kind of 6v1. You've got 4 plus 2v1. So I'll make the rules of whenever it gets played out to a side player, the method of scoring is you get it out to a side player and receive it. One of the players has to receive it and not lose possession to score back in the middle. When it goes out to a support player, the player on the opposite side just holds up one of the coloured gloves, right? The receiving player who's going to get a support player from the opposite side has to spot and call it the colour as the ball is coming back to them. So as the ball is travelling back to them, where they've got one last look, spot and call it the colour. Now, what you find, even by introducing that simple constraint, it will change the body shape. Whereas before, players will go in to receive square on, because that's their habit. Now, because you've given them something meaningful, it's only a colour, right? They'll come in with their body shape adjusted, open to as if they're going to play up the field of play, scanning to simulate as if they're going to play up the field of play, and having one last look as the ball's on its way to them. So by promoting that, you're getting them can't have a look away from the ball, even while I'm under pressure. It's only one opponent here just now, but you can change the numbers, you can change the size of the playing area, etc., etc. That's just to give you a simple idea, and now in a post session. But that promotes more scanning than the basic possession session, because I'm not saying don't use possession sessions or the opposed practice that you use, but studies have shown, and there was a study in the Netherlands that showed that if you use possession sessions, small-sided games, drill and rondos, they do not promote the same amount of scanning in those exercises than the players require in the games. So a study has shown this. I'm not saying don't use those exercises. I'm saying as coaches, if we want them to develop the habits and behaviours that they require in the games, so the numbers, the frequency of scanning they need in the games, we need to add extra constraints to these exercises to promote more. Currently, they don't, and the studies show that.
Interesting. Glenn, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, really good point. I've done a little exercise the other day in training. So you've got two little groups, 10 yards apart. One group at one end that working on their receiving, so they'll check off the mannequin. And yes, they're working the technical stuff of correctly receiving body shape and stuff. But 10 yards away, and they're having a little relay race. And similar to what Kev was saying there, they're running with a bib in their hand though, but there's 5 different colour bibs. So we've got blue, yellow, white, green. And the idea of the receiver is, when you receive this ball, or just before, can you spot the runner and what colour bib has he got in his hand? And then we reversed it and said, okay, what one is he picking up? So now there's a real congested pile of bibs. And it was terrific. And again, I agree with Kev completely. It's not, it's not about the game right now. It's about promoting the idea of zooming in. And then we went a little bit more into detail and it became a bit more challenging sort of. So we said, okay, what hand are they carrying the bib in? So now, okay, we said, we got them to try and do 3 things. And it was incredibly complex. And what we found is, and with younger kids, there's a lot of interference. So they're receiving with their feet starting to mess up. But I weren't too concerned with that because they're distracted by paying attention to the perception and what they're taking in. And eventually they said, okay, Johnny is running with a green bib in his hand, and it's his right hand. So they would say, Johnny, green, right. And it was brilliant, some of the stuff that was coming out. But again, I agree with Kevin there. It's not about the practice. It's about the habit of turning your head, and whether it's a defender coming in or your player making a great move, are you looking for the correct stuff? So I think it's a great point.
Yeah, because we chatted just briefly before we came on air, because Kev, we had a brief conversation about working, individually with players. And I said I was a bit sceptical about, someone who's there, you hold a cone up, one colour, another colour sort of thing. But then I suppose that's it really. It's more, like you said, it's not actual decision making, it's more about just habitual, just getting your head up and looking, to that triggers. I suppose that's the difference, isn't it? So then tell us a little bit about then how, what does that look like? You're fortunate enough, you work first team level as well. How are you doing those sessions with first team players?
Exactly the same. Honestly, exactly the same. But what you find with first team players is that you can progress the session into more maybe complex things for them is quicker because they've automated a lot of the process. That they can pass the ball, they can receive the ball. They're quite skillful with those techniques. And with young players, as Glenn mentioned, they are maybe not so comfortable with a receiving technique or whatever it is. But even at the top level, even at first team level, like I push them and they'll make the same mistakes that Glenn's mentioned, that all of a sudden they're only getting their feet quite right to receive that. Why? Because they haven't been put under this kind of pressure before to look away from the ball. And like I was fortunate, like Jackie, he was the manager at Partick Thistle and Dundee United, and he was big into it. He bought into the idea. So we training with the players, and it would be whether it was in a drill, whether it was an unopposed exercise, whether even it was in a post exercise, would incorporate the elements with the gloves. And people say you can't get first team players doing this. Well, you can, because we did it quite successfully. And I would have my pile of green and yellow gloves here, and the players would do the warm up, and then it would be a case of, right guys, there's the gloves, put them on, we're going to be in this exercise today, split into these groups, get it running at the basic level, then I'll come in and add the progressions. So at the first team level, we're doing exactly the same, it's just the rate of progressions quicker, and the amount of progressions that you'll be able to add in can become
so just give us an idea of that practice. I saw that in the book, just for the listeners, that how does that practice work then? Because it's gloves on, they got past someone with a different colour glove on and the same colour glove, just a little run through of that.
Well, really, it'll be that they've got certain players that they need to look for that might be trigger players. So if you're receiving a pass off someone, could be a key player, but whenever the key thing's always ask the players to scan and call it the colour and do whatever else, because then I'll have tennis balls in there as well. I'll have them touching their feet to get them off balance and take their feet out the equation longer. So it's funny that Glenn mentioned about the feet, because that's something that I try and do, so the players learn to be able to adjust late if required, either set themselves early or adjust late. But really, the key thing, I generally always link it to the scoring mechanism, and then as they're receiving a pass, they've got to scan and call it colour and do whatever else that needs to be done. But that isn't the only time that they scan. They will then have to do all the pre-scanning beforehand that's required to look at this player that they are going to look at that very last time as they're receiving the ball. Because I see too many things where the only time the player is asked to scan is when they're finally receiving the ball, and it's like, if that's the only time they look, that's too late. You've got to be, as you're moving around, this is the habit that we've got to be, as we're moving around the playing area, we'll have a look at the ball, we'll have a look away from the ball, we're moving around, we'll have a look at the ball, we'll have a look away from the ball, we'll have a look away from the ball, we'll have a look at the ball. But we don't do that. And we think, some coaches think promoting scanning is allowing the players to look at the ball, oh, now I'm receiving a pass, now I need to scan. That's too late for the first time to look away. You're using the hands to detect what are my options, where's the players, where's my teammates, where's the opponents that are critical, where's the space. Now when I'm receiving the ball, I've already formulated that in my head to, here's what I'm going to do next. The ball is now coming in, I'll look at the area where I'm going to do something next, and then I go if it's still on, or I change and adapt if it's not still on. But a lot of coaches, the only time they focus on the player, did the scan, moment that they're receiving the ball. Now, ideally, you should have that last scan as the ball's on its way to you. Sometimes you simply don't have the time. So what for that? So simple exercises, like I said earlier, where the players would all be in gloves and would maybe be using the tennis balls or not, but the players had to scan all the time. Throughout the exercise, they were forced to scan. And it was very obvious when they hadn't been scanning off the ball. And that was key. And we had a player at Partick Thistle, and Jackie talks about him. So a first team professional player, he was a right back, and he struggled in these sessions to start with, as all the players do, but he kept working it, he got better. We moved him into centre midfield. He became a playmaker for us. The second season, new players coming in, he started coaching the players in the sessions about what they should be doing and what they should be thinking about. When we moved to Dundee United, he was the first player that Jackie signed, and then he went on to play international football. Now, that is back to this, isn't it, to say that it was all about scanning, but the extra ability to scan more and look around more meant that he was able now to utilise the skills that he had to a more full capacity. Right? He already had the ability to pass the ball and control the ball and do all these things. But this ability to look around the field helped unlock that ability so he could use it more, and he became a playmaker. So
interesting. So what another part of I found really interesting about the book, and again Jer's work, is about the actual, when and when not to scan, if you like. So, the key moments of when to look at the ball, when to take your eyes off the ball. Why don't you break that down for us, for all the listeners, Kev?
Well, the important thing, the first is that when not to look at the ball, and I remember like, and Gears made this great point. I remember saying it in one of my early DVDs as well as one of the coaching points. The player should be looking at the ball as, so if Glen's passing me the football, I should be looking at the football as he's striking it, right? And for that first fraction of a second, I'm trying to measure, where's that ball going? What's the pace at? Is it coming to the left of me a little bit? Is it coming to the right of me a little bit? Is it coming straight to me? What's the pace on it? Because you're assessing the flight of the ball in the air. And even then, as the ball's coming on its way, I can still scan, but I know that I need to adjust my feet this way or that way or whatever. But when you can scan, and when you should scan, ideally, and this isn't an exhaustive list, but it gives you an idea, I say that there's 5 key times that a player can scan, or should scan. And so when they're receiving a pass, so as the ball is coming towards them, as the ball is travelling, can they have one last look away from the ball? Okay, as late as possible, as early as they need to. So there's a key time. Can they, after the play a pass, and here's what I find players don't do often enough. So if I play a pass to Glen, as that ball's travelling, when I pass it, I still need to pay attention to the flight of the ball in the first fraction of a second. Is it going where I want to? Now, the chances are a good player is going to be able to kind of tell that by feel anyway. But the point being, as that ball is travelling to Glen, can I lift my eyes to somewhere else in the playing area that helps me? So again, as that ball is travelling, I've just passed it now, can I look somewhere else? As the ball is travelling between 2 players, so it could be 2 teammates, 2 opponents in the field of play. So Glen passes the ball to you, we're out on the field of play, Glen passes the ball to you, Saul. As that ball's travelling from Glen to you, just have a look away. Right? You might be able to do more than one, but there's a key time when you can scan. Glen's got the ball. Can I look in between the touches he has? So bearing in mind that if he's going to pass to me, looking at the ball as he's striking it with his foot in that first fraction of a second is important. But in between his touches, so he might be just moving slowly, taking little touches, or he might be exploiting space with the ball. Right, so he's running with the ball, so he's getting the ball at his feet. So in between touches there, right, you can look away. Now that's very different from dribbling. If he's dribbling for close control or trying to beat an opponent, I'm not going to look away in between touches there, or the timing of that is going to be very different. So I'm not on about those where it's quick little touches trying to beat somebody. And then the last one that I talk about is actually quite advanced, and it's when you're receiving the ball, Saul, and you're taking a controlling touch, right? But I need to know you now. I need to know you as a teammate. I need to know your abilities. I need to be able to read that you're taking a controlling touch. You're going to take a first touch, and you're probably going to play it with your second. So when you take that first touch, that controlling touch, there's an opportunity for me to look away again. Okay, so there's 5 kind of key times. Now, they actually encompass everything that would happen in the game. So if you were to say, well, what about this moment? I would go, well, that fits in there just now. So these are when the play is live. So there's the key times that a player could look away from the ball, and when we should promote players looking away from the ball.
I think that what you talked about there, for example, his centre-back's bringing it out, touches out his feet, he has a touch out his feet, then, that's my trigger to scan. Then he has, when he touches a touch again, then I'll see that's relatively straightforward, tangible information you can give to a player any age, right? Isn't it? That's what I'm talking about here in terms of transferable for coaches now to say that, right? If I'm going to teach scanning, that's a pretty simple, thing to teach, isn't it? Don't look away when the player's touching the ball. Basically, when he's touching around, then that's your trigger for you to have a little look. Because I know that's just thinking about, I think that's something you could actually, for any sort of player, any age, any level, that's pretty straightforward. Glenn, what's your thoughts on any of that?
Yeah, a couple of things there. So going back on one point, and then I'll talk about. I like to kind of link it up to the pitch geography idea that I've got in mind as well, because it depends on the position you are, the area, and the situation. So what I mean is, if I'm the goalkeeper and it's coming from across, my immediate awareness of the game is going to be completely different. It's going to be shrunk. I'm going to have my eye on the crosser. I'm going to make sure whether my position's deep in the goal or the front, and I'm going to have my immediate awareness of the crowded penalty box. So cross comes in, I now catch it. I catch the ball in my hands as a goalkeeper, my awareness and perception changes. I get my head up like a meerkat, I'm scanning like a lighthouse, and now am I looking for the correct things? Can I see Son making a great run if I'm Hugo Lloris yesterday, or whoever the goalkeeper is, or Ederson? Can he see Sterling?
Stop it with that Tottenham way.
Sorry, but then Saul, then flip it on its head. The link-ups between Kane and Son tremendous, but I believe a lot of it comes from perception and awareness. So if we look at the 2 goals yesterday, there's a massive awareness piece. Obviously, they had an intention of Harry Kane dropping in, and Harry Kane's then had the awareness of the centre half up his back. Son's had the awareness of the fullback slightly jumped a little bit, and they've just linked it together with a great pass. I think there was a good point that Kev said a minute ago about you might choose to play the pass or not, because I think having a refusal technique in your system is a really good thing. So what I mean by that is some of the best players refuse some of the greatest passes we've never seen. So what I mean is Dennis Bergkamp, and it's important, this comes from constantly looking at pictures. If we watch how much Messi looks at the back line of a back four, he doesn't play that killer pass the only time he sees it. He probably has seen 50 other passes that, because his forward hasn't made the correct run, or it wasn't quite on, the defender's read it, he's refused that pass probably 20, 30 times in a game. And I think Bergkamp was the master. So if you can picture, do you remember that wonderful goal? And I'm reading Bergkamp's book, and it's wonderful, it's really insightful. He says about what was the best pass he ever played, and there was obviously a few up there, but he talks about the Lundberg one where he's dribbling. So this is flip side to the goalkeeper catching the ball. Bergkamp, in my opinion, is in a head down space. We obsess about head up, but in that moment he's in a head down space, but his head's down but his eyes are up. So now the perception for me personally is he's looking at the corner of his eyes, he's getting a feel and a sense for a run. And if you can picture the goal, it's the one on the edge of the box against Juventus, I think. He's hooking, twisting, turning, cutting, and he's crowded in by 3 players in a game that me and you know is called phone box, right? It looks like phone box. He's crowded in by 3 players, but then his timing is exceptional. You know, he waits for that Lundberg to make that little darting run. He flips the pass in behind, and you know, he defines it as the greatest pass he's ever played. But there's a few things happening there. He's on the edge of the box. He's in a tight space, so his head's down, and there's a different perceptual stuff going on there. And I think the refusal thing and picking the right moment is really, really key. And I think that's where saying Kane and Son, for example, have got the connectivity. The timing of what they do is quite exceptional. So it's a bit of a long-winded answer there.
Kev, what's your thoughts on that, mate?
No, I think he's right. And the way I always talk about it is that players need to be able to scan left and right. Players need to be able to scan horizontally and vertically, and players need to be able to scan at the right time. We've touched on that. But the scanning demands in the game can be position specific, and they could be team specific, and they could be game specific. So I'm always a big advocate of, let's try and help our players become habitual scanners, and habitual scanners 360, because wherever they then need to play in the field, and then whichever circumstances they're in, they've got the ability to. Now, what Glen touched on, and I've not really touched on it at all, is the scanning when you're in possession of the ball. You know, and that's what Bergkamp was using there. But a lot of that actually gets fed by the amount of scans that they had before they received the ball to build up the basic picture, the map of the field of play, and then those little looks with the eye just supplement that and keep informing that and updating that picture. And the reason, you know, and Glen was on about this refusal, that would be inhibition. So players, you know, wouldn't they play a pass because they see that basically their teammates are on the same wavelength to them as at that moment in time. So they've made a choice there. They've made a decision not to play the pass because it's an informed decision, right? Because they've looked beforehand, right? To whatever degree, at whatever time. They've looked beforehand, they realise that those passes aren't on, so they aren't going to play them. And what I always say, there's a technical term for the players that don't play the passes or that do play the passes in those situations. And the technical term is guess, right? They play on guesswork. They go, these are the kind of things that we did work on training, so I'm going to pop it in there because he should be making that run. Yeah, and that does inform the decision-making process. But you should scan as well, because I understand that you're going to play things sometimes because that's your pattern of play. But I'd rather have a player that made that decision on, can I have that quick look to see if he's making that run, or if he's at least in a position to make that run, then I can play that ball. Because if he's not there and you play it, well, you've just given away the ball then. You've worked so hard to have possession. Now you're just going to give it away on a whim. So, yeah, I think that tying in together with the way that Kane and Son know each other, the way that play has developed, the way they have a feel for here's where the opponents are, here's where we are, this is probably what the solution is going to be. But it's been based on, one, them having a picture in their head, and then obviously their feel for the game because they're top class players. You know?
Yeah, I suppose it's like that peripheral vision sort of thing as well, isn't it? Like you say, you know, I see the run first, I anticipate he's going to make that, you know, and his timing, you know, my reading the game and all those things. So let's break it down then. So, you, for example, you know, you got your 8s, 9s, 10s, 11s, and, you know, tomorrow you've got a session on there. Listen to the podcast. You say just an easy thing would be just, you know, some external, you know, contextual interference on the outsides or something, colours, different sorts of colours, that sort of thing. You know, what's the easy things to introduce as a coach?
So an easy thing, again, it could be any numbers, any size playing area. It will depend on the coach, but you put out a playing area and say you've got eight greens, 8 blues inside the playing area. And so a simple exercise, pass to an opposite colour. So that's all I asked them to start doing. Move around the playing area, pass in however many footballs you'll have in there. You might have 2 footballs, you could have 4 footballs, you could have 6 footballs. Up to you as the coach. Move around the playing area, pass to an opposite colour. So greens pass to blue, blues pass to green. Okay, dead simple. Then what I'll introduce on the outside is 2, again, what I call flashers. So I'll have a green flasher, I'll have a blue flasher. And they are constantly on the move on the outside. I tend to use gloves. So let's say a red glove, a yellow glove. They could be holding up cones, they could be holding up pennies, it could be 1 hand, 2 hand. Entirely up to you. So they'll be constantly on the move. Now what I say is when you're receiving the football, you've got to spot and call it the colour getting held up by your teammate on the outside. Now, you don't need to pass. So let's say Glen's in green, I'm in blue. We're constantly on the move in the playing area. I'm now receiving the ball off Glen. Okay, so you're not working in pairs here. You're just passing to any other player in the opposite colour. Glen is in green, I'm in blue. He's passing the ball to me. As the ball is on its way to me, I must have a look, spot and call it the colour getting held up by the blue player on the outside. Right? So simple scanning there as the ball's on its way. Now the key thing is, what you'll find players that receive the ball. I'm receiving the ball off Glen, it's coming towards me, and all of a sudden I'm like that, looking everywhere. Oh, red. Now what does that tell you? That tells you I didn't look around before I received the pass at all. So when I work with players, and players even at 8, 9 years old, 7 years old, they'll get this, they'll understand this. Now whether they execute it well is differently. I'll say to them, okay, is that the first time you should, I say, when should you know where your teammate is on the outside? And they'll go, well, when we're receiving the pass. Because I normally put in the rule, after the pass, before your first touch, spot and call it the colour. They'll say, as the ball's come towards it, I said, well, that's when you spot and call it the colour. When should you know where your teammate is on the outside? And they'll go, all right, well, just before the pass is going to get played. I'll go, well, that's better. Why is that better? I'll say, well, you know where he is then, so you can have that look as the ball. Right, great. So what's even better than that? And eventually, well, all the time. So what I say to them, as you're moving around this playing area then, can you think, where's the footballs? Where's my teammate on the outside? Where's the footballs? Where's my teammate on the outside? Where's my footballs? Where's my teammate on the outside? And that just promotes them looking about all the time. And it's important these players are on the move all the time, not just stood in one position. So as a simple constraint, a simple exercise, and I've done this with U7s. So they get the idea. Does that mean that they do it all the time? No. Does that mean that they don't try and spot the colour and call it the colour and completely miss the football because it goes by them? No, that happens as well. Why? Because all of a sudden they'll learn to do a couple of things at once. Right? So as coaches, like Glen mentioned earlier, we can't jump on the first mistake. We've got to allow them to explore, got to allow them to self-organise this. But now I'm trying to do a couple of things. What's my timing here? Now you can go in and coach if they're consistently struggling and give them little pointers. But they do figure it out themselves. And kids aren't the idiots. They'll go around and they'll start getting it. But again, they won't get it every time. But that's still success because all you're doing is sprinkling seeds at that age.
Well, we used to have Rambo's, one of Chris Ramsey's games he gave us, one of the many was the balance game, which used to be like a 3v3 or a 4v4 if you like, and basically got too hard and then I used this throughout my career, especially in the foundation phase. Every small-sided game would be a balance line where you need to have one player in each half at all times. which then basically forces players to get your head up and have a look. It's the only sort of defending we ever did as coaching and wise in the nines at Spurs was just really, you got a balance line there, make sure you got one player there, you got balance and rotate sort of thing, because then like gets have some what's going on the pitch and just sort of basically defending. I'm thinking about, in terms of what I do in a session, I like, small-sided games and high intensity, lots of impact, sort of something like, 3v3 to 2 targets, maybe who rotate, where, you're challenging players to scan, but on, in the actual, chaos of the game almost, you know what I mean? So trying things of ways, where you can almost have like, you 1v1, 2v2, 3v3 matchups where you're forcing players to then, as you say, right, when he's touched the ball at his feet, maybe that's when you have a scan, then you're encouraging players to turn and and receive, and for example, if I got space on the back foot, that sort of thing, putting it into practice that way.
Yeah, and I gave you one example, an unopposed exercise, but a dynamic exercise. Now, I use I incorporate these these constraints into opposed exercises as well. And you're right, what you say there, because we've got to then make sure that they're able to do it under pressure. It can't just be that they're able to do it without pressure, but as soon as they have pressure, all they've got to do is go back to the ball. Now, the thing is, what I say is in these small areas, and we need them, right? But then the players, that's the limitation of the scanning, and that's not what they need in the game. They actually need to be able to alternate at the right time, alternate what's happening here, what's happening there. Big picture, small picture, big picture, small picture. And the study, back to the study that I mentioned about the Netherlands, they looked at training. This was at first team level, but this was training. The players in competitive games, they scanned just over 4 times per second before receiving the ball. In small-sided games, so what we're on about there, is they only scanned 3.5 times per second. So the constraint of that exercise actually had them scanning less than what they need to in the games. Possession games, they only scanned just over 2 times. 2 times in the 10 seconds, not 3 times per second. They scanned only just over 2 times in the 10 seconds prior to receiving the ball. Passing and receiving drills, they only did it just over 1. And in rondos, it was they scanned less than once in the 10 seconds prior to them receiving the ball. So the thing I always say is, I don't say don't use these exercises. They're great. But now the research has actually shown they don't promote as much scanning that we as coaches think it promotes. And therefore, if we want to help them promote and I'm not saying don't use these exercises, because I use those exercises, because they relate to the game. But if me as a coach, I want to try and put additional constraints on them and force them to do that extra bit of scanning, then I'm going to add in further constraints within the context of that exercise to promote more scanning.
It's interesting because it's almost like you say, you're creating that culture of that habits of all the time. Players getting your head up all the time. So training that more. Glenn, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, a couple of things as well in terms of for the coaches that are listening. Sometimes it's how we frame our questions or even directions. So obviously ask questions first. So for example, what are our objectives? And I think I see the game at times like a giant game of rondos anyway. So if I think of Barcelona under Guardiola, and I use them as examples, if you wanted to find out 11 players with probably the greatest game awareness of all time, it was probably that era of right from the back, from Piqué, Puyol, Alves to the midfielders who we know are probably, in terms of perception and scanning, has there ever been a better trio than Busquets, Xavi, Iniesta, and then Messi? We can go on. But when you look at the game for what it was almost like a giant game of rondos. And what I mean is you've got the goalkeeper that's deep, you've got 2 centre-backs split, the full-backs there, and there almost became this ring, this big circle of players. And, we've got to encourage our players to be 2 types of players. Can they play on the outside of the game? So if they're Piqué and Puyol and they're deep and they're giving us lots of depth, we need to work on their awareness, that maybe 270-degree awareness where they can see everything inside them. The minute you step inside of rondos, so if you're just playing rondos with no men in the middle, you've got limited awareness stuff you're working with. If you now make it a little bit bigger and put 1 or 2 players that we've got to play in off of, as well as the defenders. Now them players in the middle, they're getting stressed on their blind side. And I think if you look at a player like Raheem Sterling, the biggest part of his game that's transformed the last 5 years under Guardiola, in my opinion, I think he's always had the physical and technical tools. I think his technique has refined a bit and he's a bit neater and more polished. But he can now play inside the play. He doesn't have to stand out wide, receive the ball and just run at players or run from out wide. He can go and play as a 10, a false 9. He gets in the crowded box with players around him, and I think it's his perception and awareness. He's added some of that Barcelona stuff, as it were, and I think so. It's really important the way we frame our questions. So if we've got a young Busquets, if he's the right back's on the ball and he keeps receiving it, he's turning, but he's turning into pressure. Sometimes our question is all it needs, a correct question. So we say, young Sergio, can you see the left back when the right back's on the ball? If he says no, say, okay, can you get in a position to do that? And if you see him start dropping a little bit deeper, so he's now adjusting his pitch position, he's turning his feet, and he's now adjusting his body position, then it'll be, is he looking? If he's not doing any of that, I think that's when we've got to interfere. So if the answer is no, I don't know how to do this, that's when we've got to say, okay, look, come here, can you drop a little bit deeper? Turn your shoulders this way, open your feet out here, can you look for the number 3? And you're just promoting habits with good questioning and with good coaching from the side, I think, rather than just watching the ball or just coaching the mistake. Oh, it broke down, can you have a better first touch? Well, it wasn't about his first touch. It was the fact that he didn't see the pressure coming from his blind side, and that's the stuff I think we've got to be good at questioning and coaching in game, I think, and in practice.
Interesting point. And Kev, just for Kev, because because you mentioned your book as well, because that's another thing in terms of, tangible thing we can give to players or coaches can do is, like, you talk about body shape in your, it seems obvious, but maybe, you maybe take for granted, if you're like you say, Glenn, if you're closed off and you can't see the play, or, you can't actually scan, if your body shape, is not correct, you're not side on, for example, in midfield, you can't, play forward, that sort of thing. So, Kev, tell us a little bit about that, how important that is, and, if we'll come back on Glenn's point as well, if you like.
Well, body shape's hugely important, but then, this pre-scanning that you'll do will inform you the body shape that you should have. Now, you'll have your intentions of what you're going to try and do in the game, but so that will guide your decision-making process as well, or frame your decision-making process, as I would say. But so the scanning that you would do beforehand will then tell you, this is what my optimum body position is going to be with both body shape and location on the field, because I now know where are my teammates, where are my opponents, where's my space, so I should position myself like this. And too often players don't do that, and therefore that then limits them. Now, what we often see is players then not optimising their passing options, or maybe losing possession, and again, kind of tying into what Glenn said earlier, we then jump on that as coaches, but they didn't play the pass in that moment, or they lost possession in that moment, not because of that moment, but because of the accumulation of moments before that, and the things that they probably didn't do, the scanning that they didn't do before that, the adjustment of their body shape in the moments before that moment. So it becomes important, and the eyes lead the body. So if I'm scanning, I will probably tend to open my body shape to where I then want to go next with the ball, my intention then to go with the ball based on what I've seen. But if you don't look, how do you know how to position your body? Right? So I can stand side on, but I'm standing side on where it's going to take me direct into an opponent, and I don't know that opponent's there. Why? Because I haven't looked. So the scanning thing becomes really important to inform the body position side of things. So I go A to F. So A is active scanning. It leads the whole process. B is body shape. C is check again. That's as the ball's coming on its way. Can you have one last look? D is decision. E is execution. F is follow on. What do you do after your execution? That cognitive lag, do you minimise that and re-engage with the game as quickly as possible? And usually you do that by scanning again to know what am I going to do next to go and support the ball, or where do I need to move next? So that becomes important. And then with what Glenn was saying, great points. What I would say there is that what we're doing then is what we should be doing there is trying to refine a habit to position specific stuff. And I know you were just giving an example, but straight away, because of the way my brain works, I go, you're talking position specific scanning there, right? And you were just giving an example, and I understand that. But so, and my thought has been, if that's the first time, if the player hasn't got the habit of scanning, and that's it, well, we've missed a trick earlier in their development. Well, haven't they developed the habit of scanning? Now, all we should be trying to do is polish it. They've got the ability to scan, and what Glenn said there is skillfully now guided this player's scanning to the key reference points that they should have, right? So they've maybe not understood before, or the ball goes into the right back, I should know where the left back is, etc. Now, Glen has skillfully guided that player's use of their scanning abilities. But if they haven't got the ability to scan in the first place, telling them this will probably make no difference to the game, because what you'll see is that they'll still look here and they won't look there, because they've never developed that habit. Now, continuous reinforcement of those questions may eventually get them there. But it will be a longer process than if they had the habit of scanning beforehand, and now Glenn's stepping in as a coach and say, now let's guide these position specific and team specific or game specific for what you need in these scenarios. And that to me would be defining the habit and helping the players skillfully guide that scanning process, as opposed to trying to help them develop it in the first place. And again, I'm not saying that, that's just how I think about it, that's all.
What would your, I mean, because obviously scanning now is your thing, you know, what's the optimum training environment? Is it 11v11 because that's, you get the most opportunities to scan, you get the most contextual interference?
Well, 11v11 is ends up being the full game. Now, back to, if you this 360 idea, if you help the player develop the habit to scan on a consistent, continuous basis, off the ball and away from the ball, and when they're near the ball, then they'll take that into the game. So no matter where they are on the field of play, they'll be able to adapt their scanning for that moment in that time, because they've got ability to scan left, right, up, down. Any environment we create, and this is where you were on about rondos. And even when you put the two players in the middle, to me, I find that all the players then become focused inside that playing area. And again, these situations happen in the game. That's why we use rondos, because it's a microcosm of the game and they'll encounter this. But what the exceptional players were able to do, even if they were standing on the outside of that, let's say the game situation means that Busquets is the player that's on the outside of that rondo, he would still take the opportunity to think about what's happening in here in the game and what's happening out there. Because see, if I get the ball, I can play the out ball, I can play the pass, I can play that to that player that's in space. Whereas what a rondo, you see a lot of players surviving in a rondo but doing this and only relying on this peripheral vision, which they'll need in the game. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying they don't need it, but we want players to be able to know and understand, I need this, but I need this, but I need that maybe. So,
yeah, so the question, so would the question be, would you just not do a rondo then and just do your possession? And
No, I would still say I still use rondos. I just throw my constraints in. A 4v4 plus 3, I'll just put my constraints in that promotes extra scanning within that environment. Why? Because these are still valuable and productive exercises.
Yeah. I mean,
good exercises.
It was a bit of a loaded question, because I remember being on one of the advanced youth module, great course by the way. But one of the big games based advocates came on there and said basically at 9 for under 9 should be doing 11v11. It's the best format because you get more more decisions. And then my argument was, well, hang on, sometimes it's about quality rather than quantity. Do you know what I mean? You say, well, that's what I mean. But that's their thing is that they want decisions. But maybe they don't understand the importance of technique. Sorry, that's maybe that's a bit of a bad statement. That's maybe they haven't had that relationship with younger players in there. But I mean that was my argument to you. Then I suppose how do you have those smaller? You still want to get those quality contacts and, like Glen was saying, those quality movements. For me, like, there's no better way to teach possession than through rondos, possession-based things. I mean, 4v2s and 5v2s and 3v1s, that sort of thing. That's a great way to teach the basics of possession. And you want that high volume of quality repetition, but I suppose then it's about trying to balance getting those players to have that head up as well. Glen, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think. Again, I know we touched on this in the last podcast, but I'm not rigid in my thinking with that. But what I would like to do, so if I feel in general the group of players I'm working with, or 3 or 4 individuals are showing a lack of awareness, because I think as much as, like what Kev says, as much as it needs to be developed early, I still think it's something that needs maintenance. We forget about maintenance. So what I mean is, if you pick up Diego Maradona now and put him on a football pitch, he's not going to be the same magician with the same awareness as he was when he played. And I think it's maintenance. And I think the maintenance of what we're doing with the players is really important. Are we still giving them the constant, consistent messages? And so, for example, if I had a real big piece on awareness or scanning, I'd make sure it was streamlined right through the session. So one of the warm-ups would be an activation thing. Like I've said, I've done it before in a centre circle, and I like to use centre circle activities, like Kevin said, about 360-degree reference. So stand the player on the centre spot, so his feet are on the baseline. The front half of him, the front half of the semicircle is his sight side. All right, so we'll do some activities sight side first. So I'll be playing a 1-2 off of the player, and he's got, if the listeners can picture this, in the corners of the centre circle there's some players, and all we're going to do is run from the gates as an activation. And the idea might be my defender is not checking both sides enough. So as someone will be standing behind that player pointing. Right, so the player in the middle can't see this, it's on his blind side. As he points to the right, and the player's got to react to the run and literally tag them before they get to a gate that's on the halfway line. Now that's sight side stuff. Then for the next 5 minutes of the warm up, and it could be with a ball, they could be dribbling, so they've got to get across and tackle and block a gate. The next, flip it, put the players behind them. So now I'm passing in front to the coach, but the players now are running from the corners of the centre circle on my blind side. So as I'm playing passes, I'm checking, and someone runs, and there's a massive perception thing there. So that might be the warm-up, and all I'm trying to do is get my players, because I don't know, let's say the defender is not checking when there's a cross coming in, he's not checking his right shoulder. Now then when we go into the next, what might be a little rondos, a 5v5, so you've got 3v3 in the middle, target players each end, one player across one player, still go with that theme in the session. Then when it goes to a game, you're 7v7 if that's how you structure your sessions. Still streamline the theme and the habit within the session. You might really be focusing on other technical stuff, but in terms of developing the perception skill, I think it's, can we streamline it cleverly into a whole session and then go to the game on Saturday or Sunday? It's an extension of the practice. Okay guys, just remember that stuff we was doing about what we're looking for. I think so what's really important, last little point is, so go back to the Busquets thing. Thiago for me is a wonderful footballer that probably hasn't been able to express his awareness and his dominance of the ball as much, and he's had to adapt to the more vertical game of Liverpool. Like, so can I get it and can I hit the front three a little bit quicker? But I think when he receives it, he makes a decision. So he's opened up, he's looked for Trent. If he sees Trent, sometimes it might be right now I play a pass into feet. And some of the questions we've got to ask the kids are, does Trent want it to his feet? Or have you looked up and is it Mane? Is he running in behind? So again, it's just about extending them questions. Okay, well done. You can see the switch of play. Now what does your mate need? Is he standing still and does he need it feet? Has the defender jumped, left a hole, so you want to play to space? And again, I think it's just about questioning and keep moving on what they're looking for. And then you might get really, if the kid's really advanced, you might refine the details. Say, okay, you hit that ball a little bit too much into his feet rather than just ahead of him. Can you almost play the pass which allows him to go on and score in 1 or 2 touches, or cross in 1 or 2 touches? If trying to paint the picture for the listeners, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, I always talk to players when I'm working individually about, the best players in the world do most of the work before the ball arrives. Do you know what I mean? So like you talked about, Thiago, the ball comes, he knows where it's going. But I think what you said, Kev's interesting as well, is that not just having that awareness before the ball arrives, is having the ball awareness, 5 seconds or 10 seconds or 20 seconds for the 4, 5, 6 passes before it's arrived. So you're that sort of ahead of the game sort of thing, which is really sort of poignant to me if I'm thinking about, especially when I'm working with players. We're coming out of time a little bit. What would be some key takeaways for coaches to take away and put into their coaching and think about their development about in this area?
Well, kind of, Glen just said that I think it has to be there all the time. And I'll ask this when I'm delivering coaching calls, on a scale of 1 to 10, where does decision making lie for you? What number would you give it? Coach gives it a 10. Say, okay, if that decision making important to you, scanning and game awareness, decision. So how often should you do this? Because the coaches will say to me, how often should we incorporate scanning? I say, making that important, and this directly impacts decision making. How often do you think you should do it? That's what we did. Now, I choose to implement it and add these constraints in because, as Glen rightly says, whether you're maintaining a habit or I've had to develop the habit in first team players, right? So, because they haven't developed the habit, you've maybe got players that are decent at it, so you're maintaining and topping up the habit all the time because you lose it kind of thing. I believe in the everyday effect. Do something a little every day, you're going to get better at it. So, coach, important to you, you should incorporate it in whatever way you choose to. Like I say, mine's is a way, it's not the way, but every single day, because scanning is fundamentally important to how players perform, and the quality of decision making will ultimately dictate that a player is going to play it in the game. Okay, the amount of good decisions that they are able to make in the game will everyone's going to play. If they can make continuously good decisions, good quality decisions throughout a game, they've got a chance of. Now, to go with it, they need to, their skill repertoire back to it's a holistic thing. So, if we're going to impact on the player's decision making, scanning is so important. Touch and however you choose to coach it, I felt. So again, I would say that the point that Glen made was a fantastic point, but that was more for me when I look at it in my way. That's refining the habit as opposed to developing the habit, because now he's back to that skillfully guiding this. He was example of Thiago skillfully guiding it to where he may look for. The fact that Thiago's already kind of got a habit that you can play with. Right, you've already got a habit that you can guide. So can we think about the steps before that and the basic fundamental development of this habit? Because if we help skillfully guide the players' scanning habits so they can optimise the use of it, we need to help in the first place. So coaches, try and think about how do you incorporate it every single day of your training.
Well, I was going to say now, I don't know to put a spanner in the works, but I'm always, when I'm working individually with players with the ball, encouraging them to get their heads up. But sometimes I will compromise that in terms of to get more movement outcomes and be more explosive, and especially when players are learning new skills. Sometimes I'll say to players, you don't necessarily have to get, for example, doing the skill combinations, to get more speed and to get the more movement outcomes, I will compromise the head up in terms of getting more movement outcomes, if that makes sense. That's my sort of trade-off. Like thinking my vision down, I say, okay, once they've increased their speed, then it's time to then get the head up, and then if that makes sense. So I'm not saying about having that consistency, but I suppose my argument would be that sometimes I might compromise that a little bit in that area to take a little bit. And it's a bit like I said before about that. You have this, certain practices and designs. You want to work on some sort of things about quality rather than quantity. That's what I'm trying to say. And if that makes sense, does that make sense?
I think that's a great point. And what we need to bear in mind that what we're talking about, we're almost talking about two different components of scan there, because what you're on about is on the ball. Yeah. Right? What you're on about is on the ball. Whereas what we've talked about largely in this session is what players do off the ball, what the players do prior to them even getting the ball. What they will then do on the ball, another component of scan. So when I'm talking about it, I'm often talking about the off the ball aspect. I think it's like any coach, as long as you're understanding the compromises that you're making, you're going to focus on today, and eventually it'll all come together for them, but more strongly on this aspect. That's a choice that you're making as a coach and a decision you're making as a coach, because you understand the multi of performance. Coaches will just focus on the speed, but they don't understand that I'm making a compromise here.
Yeah,
I'm not asking much because I'm focusing on this. This is why I'm doing it. Whereas, and then you get the other ones that individual transfer to the game, does it, Saul?
Yeah, exactly. So on that bombshell, what about Glen? What about you? Any last thoughts on that one, Glen?
Yeah, a couple of things, just takeaway messages or things that I'm always trying to be mindful of. And again, whether I'm working with 16 to 19-year-olds or senior footballers or under nines, if there's a lack of awareness, it needs coaching. And I sometimes you've got to break it down to absolute basics. Don't just look at the age, look at the ability of the players. And on the flip side of it, you could have an under nine that's got just incredible awareness, that sees pictures better than me, got wonderful creativity, and to the point where they're trying amazing things that to the untrained eye, it looks chaotic. But what I would say is creativity is one of the most chaotic things, and don't be quick to judge a misplaced pass or something audacious. I would say ask more questions. What did you see there? Why did you do that? Because again, I'm going to finish on Wayne Rooney, who I think was one of the most genial football brains. He's probably lobbed the goalkeeper from the halfway line 3 or 4 times in his career, Saul. But again, like the Bergkamp thing, I would say he definitely didn't look for the goalkeeper off his line just 3 times. It's something that he's probably done the whole time since he was 14, 15. I'm sure as a young lad at Everton, he's probably scored more from the halfway line. And that comes from a habit, this genius habit of looking for that audacious thing, encouraging the outrageous. And when it goes wrong, please just be patient with a 6-year-old or a 16-year-old or 26, because I think they have to go through that, especially when we're talking about the brain game. It's one of the hardest things to see. We can't actually see it. We can only ask questions and try and discover how the player's thinking, what they're seeing and why. And then we've got a big piece on interpreting that, and then, okay, so what do I encourage and what do I discourage here, if that makes sense? So just be a little bit patient would be my message, and try to understand what you're seeing. Because the final point still is 2 players for me I'm fascinated by at the minute in terms of Trent Alexander-Arnold and Bruno Fernandes. There was a stat a couple of years ago when I think Bruno Fernandes got the most assists in the Premier League, and so did Trent from their positions, top 2. There was an incredible stat that season they turned the ball over the most, more than any player in the Premier League or Europe, in the attacking third or in the attacking half, which means it's not about just the outcome. Okay, Fernandes plays a lot of passes that go miles off. It's the intent that we need to constantly encourage, because Trent probably misses a hell of a lot of crosses and amazing passes, but that's part of his success, why he's one of the best passers in football. Likewise, Fernandes is going to be frustrating at times, and I think there was a stat that he turned it over 30 times in one game. You know, he probably gets subbed at under 10s football on the 5th pass, unfortunately, at times. But the 32nd pass probably eventually wins Manchester United a title of some sort, or wins the game, if that makes sense.
Amazing. And look, go on then, Kevin. Let me just give you your. You go, you go, mate.
No, I think that's another great point by Glen. And as a coach educator, living on the FA level 2s or the B license or whatever, I would always ask coaches, going into coach decision, or are you going into coach the action? And too often, as Glen has rightly pointed out, we see a breakdown and they would then actually go in and coach the decision, you know, and so a great through ball, but it hasn't just come off. And so they would go, all right, have a look here. Now you've got a safe little pass on the inside, play. But you're coaching the decision there, so I would say to them, was that the right decision? Was the idea of that ball good? Yep. Only have that kind of pass in the locker. Have they got that passing range in them? Yep. So was it the action that wasn't quite right, or was it a poor decision? It was the. Therefore, let's focus on. Let's not change their decision, because their decision, it was a great idea. Like Glen said, it was creative. They'd managed to see something, so that's fantastic. Don't then take that away from them and go and coach the decision, right? So, and as coaches, we've got to what are we coaching? Are we going in to coach the decision, or are we going to coach the action? And too often I see coaches going in to coach the decision when that wasn't the problem in the first place.
Interesting. Let me just plug a book here, Scanning, How to Train It and Develop Game Awareness. I've had it for a few months, really interesting. I definitely recommend it. And where can people find out more about yourself, Kev, as well? Do you want to drop some social links, some bombs?
Well, I've got my website that needs to be updated, socceriq.com. But you know,
sorry, that's what I was going to say as well. Because I mean, we first met when you were Soccer IQ, which is Soccer IEYE and then Q. That's where your brainchild a lot of this come from before. So you can follow that, and then obviously, you know, you're on Twitter and what is your Twitter? For people.
I use my main one's Kevin McGreskin, so at Kevin McGreskin, so people can get me there.
We'll put that in the links here in the podcast.
Yeah, and if anybody ever wants to get in touch or ask about things or engage, I'm always happy to chat. You know, I'm always happy to to talk about this stuff. In fact, anybody that gets in touch, be prepared for me just to talk endlessly and ramble on.
If someone sees you in the street, they just got to wave, right? Because your head's on a swivel. You're clocking straight away.
No, I told you I'm not very good at this kind of stuff. I talk a good game. That's
it. Listen, on that bombshell, another bombshell. Thanks very much, guys. It's been fantastic. Kev, I appreciate it. Back up there now in beautiful, sunshiny but freezing cold Canada, and you've just left Mexico. Thanks, everyone. And Glen, as always, mate. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure, mate.
See you later, guys.
It's been great. Cheers.
Welcome to the Coaching Family Soccer Coaching Podcast, a podcast for soccer coaches from grassroots to the pro game. Soccer coaches who love the game, love coaching, and want to get better. Join our community on Twitter @CoachingFamily.